So this evening we're taking a break from our study of Life Divine so that we can look at a powerful but small book that Sri Aurobindo wrote, The Mother. There are 6 chapters in The Mother, and how this book was composed we know a little bit about. You remember that the Sri Aurobindo ashram came into being, let us say, on the 24th of November in 1926. Sri Aurobindo had drafted a letter. That letter he revised and released as the first message on the mother's birthday in 1927. That is this first chapter. In the summer, Sri Aurobindo composed what we now know as chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5, kept them aside. In September, he began to work on the 6th chapter, which is the real core of the book. And by October had it finished. Sent it off to the publisher, and in early 1928, that book was released to the public. First to the ashram and its members, and then to the public. This is some of the most powerful and mellifluous prose that Sri Aurobindo ever wrote. M.P. Pandit, himself a great author, described it, echoing his teacher, Sri Kapali Shastriya, that it was a Matri Upanishad, an Upanishad of the mother. A book which was a magazine of spiritual power. The sentences are mantric, and to memorize them is to have allies with you in your internal being, which can come to breathe life and courage and purity into you, moment by moment. It is not a book to be read and set aside. It is a book to be lived. Every phrase has meaning. So tonight we're going to give at least a summary look at chapters 1 through 5 and see how much of it we can actually read out loud, simply to hear his words reverberating in the atmosphere. So we begin. There are 2 powers that alone can effect in their conjunction the great and difficult thing which is the aim of our endeavor, a fixed and unfailing aspiration that calls from below, and a supreme grace from above that answers. But the supreme grace will act only in the conditions of the light and the truth. It will not act in conditions laid upon it by the falsehood and the ignorance. For if it were to yield to the demands of the falsehood, it would defeat its own purpose. These are the conditions of the light and truth, the sole conditions under which the highest force will descend. And it is only the very highest supramental force, descending from above and opening from below, that can victoriously handle the physical nature and annihilate its difficulties. There must be a total and sincere surrender. There must be an exclusive self-opening to the divine power. There must be a constant and integral choice of the truth that is descending, a constant and integral rejection of the falsehood of the mental, vital, and physical powers and appearances that still rule the earth nature. The surrender must be total and seize all the parts of the being. It is not enough that the psychic should respond and the higher mental accept, or even the inner vital submit and the inner physical consciousness feel the influence. There must be in no part of the being, even the most external, anything that makes a reserve, anything that hides behind doubts, confusions, and subterfuges, anything that revolts or refuses. If part of the being surrenders, but another part reserves itself, follows its own way, or makes its own conditions, then each time that happens, you are yourself pushing the divine grace away from you. If behind your devotion and surrender, you make a cover for your desires, egoistic demands, and vital insistences, if you put these things in place of the true aspiration, or mix them with it and try to impose them on the divine Shakti, then it is idle to invoke the divine grace to transform you. If you open yourself on one side or in one part to the truth, and on another side are constantly opening the gates to hostile forces, it is vain to expect that the divine grace will abide with you. You must keep the temple clean if you wish to install there the living presence. If each time the power intervenes and brings in the truth, you turn your back on it and call in again the falsehood that has been expelled, it is not the divine grace that you must blame for failing you, but the falsity of your own will and the imperfection of your own surrender. If you call for the truth, and yet something in you chooses what is false, ignorant, and undivine, or even simply is unwilling to reject it altogether, then always you will be open to attack, and the grace will recede from you. Detect first what is false or obscure in you, and persistently reject it. Then alone can you rightly call for the divine power to transform you. Do not imagine that truth and falsehood, light and darkness, surrender and selfishness can be allowed to dwell together in the house consecrated to the divine. The transformation must be integral, and integral therefore the rejection of all that withstands it. Reject the false notion that the divine power will do and is bound to do everything for you at your demand, and even though you do not satisfy the conditions laid down by the Supreme. Make your surrender true and complete. Then only will all else be done for you. Reject, too, the false and indolent expectation that the divine power will do even the surrender for you. The Supreme demands your surrender to her, but does not impose it. You are free at every moment till the irrevocable transformation comes to deny and to reject the divine, or to recall your self-giving, if you are willing to suffer the spiritual consequence. Your surrender must be self-made and free. It must be the surrender of a living being, not of an inert automaton or mechanical tool. An inert passivity is constantly confused with the real surrender. But out of an inert passivity, nothing true and powerful can come. It is the inert passivity of physical nature that leaves it at the mercy of every obscure or undivine influence. A glad and strong and helpful submission is demanded to the working of the divine force, the obedience of the illumined disciple of the truth, of the inner warrior who fights against obscurity and falsehood, of the faithful servant of the divine. This is the true attitude, and only those who can take and keep it preserve a faith unshaken by disappointments and difficulties, and shall pass through the ordeal to the supreme victory and the great transformation and the great transmutation. So, again, written first as a letter and revised and released as a message, a challenge, an invitation, but a demanding invitation. The aspiration that we provide, the supreme grace answering from above. So, this movement represents the earth's aspiration. And so if we truly wish to have a transformation of our global life that reflects the values of truth and purity, splendor and ananda, then it is up to us to clear the pathway. And so the aspiration in us for these things that exclude from us the things that would retard or deter is incumbent upon us. Of course it is difficult. Of course it is the very challenge of our lives to be able to arrest the normal flow of nature, which is bound to its normal routines in the ignorance, and find the upward route that takes us back into an active communion with this divine grace, which alone can transform and transcend. It demands a surrender. The note has already been sounded here in this first chapter of what it is that we have to provide. It is our aspiration and our surrender, our self-giving, turning ourselves into the altar, but also finding within ourselves the fire that burns, that aspiration, which purifies, cleanses, and lifts up the offering. And what is it that we offer? But our very selves. We are that offering. So in that active surrender, we rise. We discover what is not ready, but we start to make it ready. No one can fulfill all of these conditions at once. Yoga is a process. It is not that Sri Aurobindo was demanding that all of the disciples of the ashram have executed their sadhana perfectly and have attained this height at this time. But it is a progressive goal that we must continue to work at and achieve. This inert passivity that he refers to in the last couple of paragraphs. When we arrest the normal flow of our nature, we might arrive at a position where we're no longer demanding and clamoring for the things that our ego and desire see before us, wishing them to be ours. But instead we lapse into what we think is a favorable condition, which is one of passivity. No, I don't wish for it anymore. But we don't have any active push forwards. We are not progressive. What he describes here, a glad and strong and helpful submission, this is the psyche from within beginning to press upon the nature and demand that this move forward. And you can see what it influences. It asks for the obedience of the illumined disciple of the truth. That is the mind. The mind is called in as an ally. Of the inner warrior who fights against obscurity. falsehood. That is the true vital being in us, not the false front of it, ever pursuing its desires, but no, that hero who resides inside, who can step forward and fight for the truth. And of course, the body is the faithful servant. So mind, life, and body, suffused with the psychic glow, can achieve this state of perfect surrender. So the aspiration can become realized in our surrender. It has to be made dynamic, and that surrender, that self-offering, is more than simply wishing that this would come. A supreme victory, it may not be here by Tuesday, but it will be here. Contingent upon how much the earth's aspiration is realized in our actual lives. And we are the engines of the earth's aspiration. Let's look at chapter 2. This again was written in the summer of 1927. In all that is done in the universe, the divine through his Shakti is behind all action, but he is veiled by his Yoga Maya and works through the ego of the Jiva in the lower nature. In yoga also, it is the divine who is the sadhaka and the sadhana. It is his Shakti with her light, power, knowledge, consciousness, ananda, acting upon the adhara. And when it is open to her, pouring into it with these divine forces that makes the sadhana possible. But so long as the lower nature is active, the personal effort of the sadhaka remains necessary. The personal effort required is a triple labor of aspiration, rejection, and surrender. An aspiration, vigilant, constant, unceasing. The mind's will, the heart's seeking, the ascent of the vital being, the will to open and make plastic the physical consciousness and nature. Rejection of the movements of the lower nature, rejection of the mind's ideas, opinions, preferences, habits, constructions, so that the true knowledge may find free room in a silent mind. Rejection of the vital nature's desires, demands, cravings, sensations, passions, selfishness, pride, arrogance, lust, greed, jealousy, envy, hostility to the truth, so that the true power and joy may pour from above into a calm, large, strong, and consecrated vital being. Rejection of the physical nature's stupidity, doubt, disbelief, obscurity, obstinacy, pettiness, laziness, unwillingness to change, tamas, so that the true stability of light, power, ananda, may establish itself in a body growing always more divine. Surrender of oneself, and all one is and has, and every plane of the consciousness and every movement to the divine and the Shakti. In proportion as the surrender and self-consecration progress, the sadhaka becomes conscious of the divine Shakti doing the sadhana, pouring into him more and more of herself, founding in him the freedom and perfection of the divine nature. The more this conscious process replaces his own effort, the more rapid and true becomes his progress. But it cannot completely replace the necessity of personal effort until the surrender and consecration are pure and complete from top to bottom. Note that a tamasic surrender, refusing to fulfill the conditions and calling on God to do everything and save one all the trouble and struggle, is a deception and does not lead to freedom and perfection. So we meet terms that we have encountered before in the life divine. The divine, which is not simply an impersonality, not simply a personality, but an all-inclusive reality, expressive through Shakti, the divine consciousness force, is behind all action. But we do not see it because of the function of the Yoga Maya. How the divine, in its consciousness, it is a yogic enterprise, an enterprise by which it restrains itself in yoga. It is in union with itself, but it compresses its being and measures out through this Yoga Maya the infinity, which is its complete state, into an expressive universe which symbolizes what its infinity is. And we've met too the concept of the jiva, which is the true individual. But it is not the true individual that we first meet in our active lives. It is a figuring of it. The ego is in front of our nature, and that shifting semblance of individuality is what we first know to be ourselves. But we outgrow it. And part of how we outgrow it is through the practice of a spiritual discipline, a sadhana. Sadhaka, sadhana, from the root sad, S-A-D-H, to go straight. So a sadhaka is one who takes the straight path, from ignorance to knowledge, from division to unity. The sadhana is the pathway, and not simply the trail, but it is the engine at the same time. It is the technique, the practice, the psychotechnology that takes us into that state. So the Shakti, with all that is within it, power, knowledge, consciousness, bliss, works through the adhara of our nature. The adhara is the jar. It is the vehicle, the container of our whole being. Body, life, mind, soul behind. Pouring her energies into it enlivens the sadhana. It is she who is acting in us. The things that we provide from our side are the aspiration, again, remember how key that is, the process of rejection and surrender, which we've also met in the first chapter. There dealt with in summary form. Here, rolled out more, we can see what the aspiration consists of. All the being must participate, mind, life, and body, in a sense, ignited by the soul's aspiration within. But then the rejection comes into play. And it is a general inventory of the human condition that appears here that we have to wrestle with and overcome. And finally, the total self-giving, which is the very nature of the surrender. It is not something, there is no perfect word in English for it. It should become the soul's joyous offering of all that it finds in itself. This is what I find in my physical nature, I give this to you. This is what I found in my heart, in my energizings, let me offer that to you. These are the best thoughts that I have, the clarities of my mind, let me offer this to you. And as we do that, and as it becomes progressive, and one part in its aspiration and surrender influences another part. And so the whole being becomes integrated, harmonized. We find more and more that it's really she who is doing this. This Shakti, the divine power, the consciousness force of the Supreme, who is affecting this change within us. But still, so long as we perceive a difference between ourselves and her, we have to keep up the personal effort. We can't stop and fall into that inert passivity of the first chapter. A tamasic surrender, trying to throw the responsibility to the divine, is not active cooperation from our side. How is the world to be transformed if we demand that the divine do it? We're here as agents of the divine, and we must work out the terms of this transformation in us, in this adhara personally, in the larger context, in our social life, and ultimately extending that light to the globe. So this replacement of our ordinary nature with a higher nature is the replacement of the lower prakriti with para prakriti, the supreme nature of the divine. We are, in concert with the divine, introducing the divine plenitude into the actual life of the earth when we practice yoga. When this surrender becomes real in us, there is a confluence. The divine pours into us. We take upwards the earth's aspiration and posit it in the divine being. So now the third chapter, which is about how we install in ourselves the condition of abhaya, a fearless condition. To walk through life armored against all fear, peril, and disaster, only two things are needed, two that go always together: the grace of the Divine Mother, and on your side, an inner state made up of faith, sincerity, and surrender. Let your faith be pure, candid, and perfect. An egoistic faith in the mental and vital being, tainted by ambition, pride, vanity, mental arrogance, vital self-will, personal demand, desire for the petty satisfactions of the lower nature, is a low and smoke-obscured flame that cannot burn upwards to heaven. Regard your life as given you only for the divine work and to help in the divine manifestation. Desire nothing but the purity, force, light, wideness, calm, ananda of the divine consciousness, and its insistence to transform and perfect your mind, life, and body. Ask for nothing but the divine, spiritual, and supramental truth, its realization on earth and in you and in all who are called and chosen, and the conditions needed for its creation and its victory over all opposing forces. Let your sincerity and surrender be genuine and entire. When you give yourself, give completely, without demand, without condition, without reservation, so that all in you shall belong to the Divine Mother, and nothing be left to the ego or given to any other power. The more complete your faith, sincerity, and surrender, the more will grace and protection be with you. And when the grace and protection of the Divine Mother are with you, what is there that can touch you, or whom need you fear? A little of it even will carry you through all difficulties, obstacles, and dangers. Surrounded by its full presence, you can go securely on your own way because it is hers, careless of all menace, unaffected by any hostility, however powerful, whether from this world or from worlds invisible. Its touch can turn difficulties into opportunities, failure into success, and weakness into unfaltering strength. For the grace of the Divine Mother is the sanction of the Supreme, and now or tomorrow its effect is sure, a thing decreed, inevitable, and irresistible. Let us turn to chapter 4. Money is the visible sign of a universal force, and this force in its manifestation on earth works on the vital and physical planes and is indispensable to the fullness of the outer life. In its origin and its true action, it belongs to the divine. But like other powers of the divine, it is delegated here, and in the ignorance of the lower nature, can be usurped for the uses of the ego, or held by asuric influences, and perverted to their purpose. This is indeed one of the three forces, power, wealth, sex, that have the strongest attraction for the human ego and the asura, and are most generally misheld and misused by those who retain them. The seekers or keepers of wealth are more often possessed rather than its possessors. Few escape entirely a certain distorting influence stamped on it by its long seizure and perversion by the asura. For this reason, most spiritual disciplines insist on a complete self-control, detachment, and renunciation of all bondage to wealth and of all personal and egoistic desire for its possession. Some even put a ban on money and riches, and proclaim poverty and bareness of life as the only spiritual condition. But this is an error. It leaves the power in the hands of the hostile forces. To reconquer it for the divine to whom it belongs, and use it divinely for the divine life, is the supramental way for the Sataka. You must neither turn with an ascetic shrinking from the money power, the means it gives and the objects it brings, nor cherish a rajasic attachment to them or a spirit of enslaving self-indulgence in their gratifications. Regard wealth simply as a power to be won back for the mother and placed at her service. All wealth belongs to the divine, and those who hold it are trustees, not possessors. It is with them today, tomorrow it may be elsewhere. All depends on the way they discharge their trust while it is with them, in what spirit, with what consciousness in their use of it, to what purpose. In your personal use of money, look on all you have or get or bring as the mother's. Make no demand, but accept what you receive from her and use it for the purposes for which it is given to you. Be entirely selfless, entirely scrupulous, exact, careful in detail, a good trustee. Always consider that it is her possessions and not your own that you are handling. On the other hand, what you receive for her, lay religiously before her. Turn nothing to your own or anybody else's purpose. Do not look up to men because of their riches, or allow yourself to be impressed by the show, the power, or the influence. When you ask for the mother, you must feel that it is she who is demanding through you a very little of what belongs to her, and the man from whom you ask will be judged by his response. If you are free from the money taint, but without any ascetic withdrawal, you will have a greater power to command the money force for the divine work. equality of mind, absence of demand, and the full dedication of all you possess and receive, and all your power of acquisition to the divine Shakti and her work, are the signs of this freedom. Any perturbation of mind with regard to money and its use, any claim, any grudging, is a sure index of some imperfection or bondage. The ideal sadhaka in this kind is one who, if required to live poorly, can so live, and no sense of want will affect him or interfere with the full inner play of the divine consciousness. And if he is required to live richly, can so live and never for a moment fall into desire or attachment to his wealth or to the things that he uses, or servitude to self-indulgence, or a weak bondage to the habits that the possession of riches creates. The divine will is all for him, and the divine ananda. In the supramental creation, the money force has to be restored to the divine power and used for a true and beautiful and harmonious equipment and ordering of a new divinized vital and physical existence in whatever way the Divine Mother herself decides in her creative vision. But first it must be conquered back for her, and those will be strongest for the conquest who are in this part of their nature strong and large and free from ego, and surrendered without any claim or withholding or hesitation, pure and powerful channels for the supreme puissance. We might note that this fourth chapter, as we understand it, was written by Sri Aurobindo as a letter of encouragement to somebody, we'll leave that person unnamed, who is going back to Bengal, to Calcutta, to try to raise funds for this ashram, which was in its very earliest months of existence. And so, the stringent tone of this is to make sure that the person seeking the funding in Bengal would have an attitude that reflected the highest values of Mother and Sri Aurobindo. They were not beggars. They were permitting those who wish to give to offer their active energies back so that a divine life could be manifested upon earth. He begins this section with, money is the visible sign of a universal force. So it is a force, a power of the Mahashakti, of the nature of Mahalakshmi, as we'll meet later, the great force of beauty and fullness and perfection, that here in the divided world has lost its way and become captive to the lower forces. The Asura is the ancient one, the old god, who, coming out of the Divine Mother as a manifestation of her force and power, leans on its own separate nature and lives divided from her, and becomes a prisoner of its own ignorance. Ignoring its connection to the divine, it goes upon its own career, claiming suzerainty of the nature, mind, life, and body. It claims all for itself, and the money force has been largely turned to its advantage. And so, a sign of the return of the earth to the divine will be when we see that economic force, the flow of money in the world, works towards the harmonization and advancement of all life upon earth. That is not secreted in small hands, but is given largely to all. Sri Aurobindo, in writing on the high regard of polity, describes a future humanity where all have a right to a simple but rich life. Rich first on the inside, that they have the aesthetic treasure, the rasa from living in the world. They get the sap of existence. There should be no strain, no suffering, but there should be hard and productive industry that reflects an effortful work towards transformation, so that what comes to us is turned around in that great circuitry, so that it returns to the divine and is allowed to come back to earth. And so it goes, a cyclic ascent and descent. So the money force should be used to promote the progress of the values of life in restoring unity and beauty and a true knowledge. Instead, we have the situation today where great wealth is concentrated in the hands of a very few, and the earth suffers. So, as we establish a psychicized life in a psychicized community, we can demonstrate what it is that makes life rich, that we ask from nature only what we need, but that what we have, we polish to a shine of perfection. Needs are small, but we don't want to live a bare ascetic life either. It is not a life of renunciation that we seek, but a life in which the simplicity of the soul shines through in its enjoyment of all things at all levels. Beautiful in thought, beautiful in feeling, beautiful in aspect, in a life that is more and more perfect. So let us turn to the 5th chapter. If you want to be a true doer of divine works, your first aim must be to be totally free from all desire and self-regarding ego. All your life must be an offering and a sacrifice to the Supreme. Your only object in action shall be to serve, to receive, to fulfill, to become a manifesting instrument of the divine Shakti in her works. You must grow in the divine consciousness till there is no difference between your will and hers, no motive except her impulsion in you, no action that is not her conscious action in you and through you. Until you are capable of this complete dynamic identification, You have to regard yourself as a soul and body created for her service, one who does all for her sake. Even if the idea of the separate worker is strong in you, and you feel that it is you who do the act, yet it must be done for her. All stress of egoistic choice, all hankering after personal profit, all stipulation of self-regarding desire must be extirpated from the nature. There must be no demand for fruit and no seeking for reward. The only fruit for you is the pleasure of the Divine Mother and the fulfillment of her work. Your only reward, a constant progression in divine consciousness and calm and strength and bliss. The joy of service and the joy of inner growth through works is the sufficient recompense of the selfless worker. But a time will come when you will feel more and more that you are the instrument and not the worker. For first, by the force of your devotion, your contact with the Divine Mother will become so intimate that at all times you will have only to concentrate and to put everything into her hands to have her present guidance, her direct command or impulse, the sure indication of the thing to be done and the way to do it and the result. And afterwards you will realize that the Divine Shakti not only inspires and guides, but initiates and carries out your works. All your movements are originated by her. All your powers are hers. Mind, life, and body are conscious and joyful instruments of her action, means for her play, molds for her manifestation in the physical universe. There can be no more happy condition than this union and dependence. For this step carries you back beyond the borderline from the life of stress and suffering in the ignorance into the truth of your spiritual being, into its deep peace and its intense ananda. While this transformation is being done, it is more than ever necessary to keep yourself free from all taint of the perversions of the ego. Let no demand or insistence creep in to stain the purity of the self-giving and the sacrifice. There must be no attachment to the work or the result, no laying down of conditions, no claim to possess the power that should possess you, no pride of the instrument, no vanity or arrogance. Nothing in the mind or in the vital or physical parts should be suffered to distort to its own use or seize for its own personal and separate satisfaction the greatness of the forces that are acting through you. Let your faith, your sincerity, your purity of aspiration be absolute and pervasive of all the planes and layers of the being. Then every disturbing element and distorting influence will progressively fall away from your nature. The last stage of this perfection will come when you are completely identified with the Divine Mother and feel yourself to be no longer another and separate being, instrument, servant, or worker, but truly a child and eternal portion of her consciousness and force. Always she will be in you and you in her. It will be your constant, simple, and natural experience that all your thought and seeing and action, your very breathing and moving, come from her and are hers. You will know and see and feel that you are a person and power formed by her out of herself, put out from her for the play, and yet always safe in her, being of her being, consciousness of her consciousness, force of her force, ananda of her ananda. When this condition is entire, and her supramental energies can freely move you, then you will be perfect in divine works. Knowledge, will, action will become sure, simple, luminous, spontaneous, flawless, and outflow from the supreme, a divine movement of the eternal. So this chapter on Karma Yoga, aiming at this complete dynamic identification. But if we have to begin from the poise of the worker, we're conscious of ourself, and we have to give. We consecrate what we offer. And as we give, we become more and more aware of she to whom we give it, and less of oneself. Egoism begins to melt away. You become the instrument and perceive that it is she who is acting in you, inspiring, initiating, guiding, carrying you, improving the vessel which you are, dusting the path before you, preparing the platform upon which you will place the offering. This is a period in which the psyche within begins to flower. And the ego, less and less present, retiring to the background, less necessary as a functioning part of the individuality, because the soul is growing into its place. The real individual is emerging. And then that last transformation where, having moved from the worker to the instrument, we become one with her, a child of the mother. And the psyche comes into full emergence. So you can see that even in the field of work, we can be the perfect bhakta. We can be the perfect jnanin and come to know her through growing oneness in action. Come to love her as she comes to throw to our survey, our assay of her in the world, that she is all things and everywhere, and whatever we touch and taste is for her, and everything in our hands becomes an offering, until we are simply a child playing in her universe, in her garden, carrying to her the things that we find. Mother, look what I've discovered. Isn't it beautiful? It's yours. And she bestows upon us her grace, her love, her delight. And in that oneness, in which mind and heart and will and body are all fixed upon her, we live in yogic communion with her. Then that higher nature and supramental energy, which the earth desperately needs, can flow through us. So yes, work is necessary, but it is work in communion with the divine. So the emergence of the true individual in us becomes one with a divine movement of the eternal. We've been in the chapter in the Life Divine entitled The Eternal and the Individual. This we meet here. The eternal and the individual compose a perfect harmony when we are conterminous in the conscious being of the divine. So the mother meets the book, the Life Divine. Next week, we'll take up chapter 6. And we'll meet directly Sri Aurobindo's words about the 4 aspects, powers of the Divine Mother. Tonight, we come to Savitri again to close our evening. It's only fitting that we read from Book 3, the Book of the Divine Mother. This is a section, the House of the Spirit and the New Creation. Om Tatastu, may it be so. A vast truth consciousness took up these signs to pass them on to some divine child heart that looked on them with laughter and delight, enjoyed in these transcendent images, living and real as the truths they house. The Spirit's wide neutrality became a playground of miracles, a rendezvous for the secret powers of a mystic timelessness. It made of space a marvel house of God. It poured through time its works of ageless might, unveiled, seen as a luring, rapturous face, the wonder and beauty of its love and force. The eternal goddess moved in her cosmic house, sporting with God as a mother with her child. To him the universe was her bosom of love. His toys were the immortal verities. All here, self-lost, had there its divine place. The powers that here betray our hearts and err were there, sovereign in truth, perfect in joy, masters in a creation without flaw, possessors of their own infinitude. Their mind, a splendid sun of vision's rays, shaped substance by the glory of its thoughts, and moved amidst the grandeur of its dreams. Imagination's great ensorceling rod summoned the unknown and gave to it a home, outspread luxuriantly in golden air truth's iris-colored wings of fantasy, or sang to the intuitive heart of joy wonder's dream notes that bring the real close. Its power that makes the unknowable near and true, in the temple of the ideal shrined the one. It peopled thought and mind and happy sense, filled with bright aspects of the might of God and living persons of the One Supreme, the speech that voices the ineffable, the ray revealing unseen presences, the virgin forms through which the formless shines, the word that ushers divine experience, and the ideas that crowd the infinite. So on the 14th of February, 2016, which in America is Valentine's Day, which we will convert to a symbol of love, which we offer from us to her. Next week, on the 21st of February, we celebrate the Mother's birthday, reading the 6th chapter of the Mother. Until then, Namaste, Jai Ma, and our friends on Zoom.